And yes, I'm afraid there's a part three. My absurd project of introducing the 18th century in 15 minutes having collapsed like a badly built library into a mass of bricks, not, in fact, forming a coherent structure. It was bound to happen. I'm mainly concerned with what I left out, even though what I put in when I composed my two preceding videos was very much what we are going to concentrate on. But in doing so, we are going to omit so much that we ought to have at the back of our minds. After all, this is the century of 1789, of the great and terrible French Revolution, of 1776, of the American Revolution. And so when I speak of the 18th century as a revolutionary century and speak primarily of architectural metaphysics and the move from the vertical to the horizontal, I am very much dehumanizing the 18th century into a place where ideas meet. And so they do. And the French Revolution is an idea, as is the American Revolution. It's a confused idea because it's a confused century. And 1789 presents itself as the overthrow of the aristocrats, and thus as a model, perhaps, for the Russian Revolution, as indeed it was, as in many ways it was the forerunner, because in neither case were, from a Marxist point of view, the working class attacking or overcoming their cruel, exploitative masters. It was simply the middle class who were making things better for themselves. It's true that in many ways they brought with them a rationality which underlies the struggle against class. They brought that with them, though like all revolutions they promptly betrayed it, because the thing that you're really fighting against when you're fighting the class struggle, it's not the aristocracy, it's not the taxes and their palaces that they own and all the wonderful privileges that they have. That's not where the fight is. The fight is against human greed, which, alas, occupies those palaces more effectually than the particular aristocrats who built them or who lived in them. So when the overturning, the full feast of medieval days, when the servants become the masters and the masters of the servants, when that's accomplished, at least the deep common sense of the Middle Ages asserted itself in the fact that after the full feast you went back again to the masters being masters and the servants servants. But when there was a genuine attempt at overturning the class structure, it was of course completely undermined by the way in which the new ruling class, so here's the new boss, same as the old boss, as Pete Townshend of The Who wrote it, the new ruling class, of course, become the exploitative class, just as the class which they were attempting to root out were in their day. So, in that sense, I have to admit that as somebody who privileges art and literature, the physical revolutions of the century are less convincing to me than the metaphysical wars. The physical wars always seem to me to be a way of manifesting secretly the surrender of certain ideas which are supposedly being replaced, but are merely being changed, merely people changing seats. Likewise, the American Revolution, which has a lot more to say for itself, I think, than the French, was wrought not by Americans but by mercenary soldiers, and only just achieved. And without those mercenary soldiers, would never have been achieved if it had depended upon American soldiers. Impossible. And we would still be living under, good Queen Elizabeth II. Would it make any difference? I mean, this was a war ostensibly fought over taxes. But look at the taxes to which we are subjected now. They are feeble, certainly compared to the taxes on the rich that were until we entered the Reagan era, in which we are still living, when the rich get away with murder and the murdered get forgotten. So this revolution here in America overthrew a colonial mission. The colonial project was overthrown by the colonialists themselves. The original plan, when they were bitterly debated, how were they going to address the American president? It was going to be, Your Royal Highness, believe it or not. That's what Adams proposed. He'd been spending a lot of time in European capitals, and it had infected his mind. And we were going to have George Washington as Your Highness. They managed to prevent that, but only just. So the revolution was not really a revolution in values here, and the Americans of today are still nostalgic for royalty. They still want a royal family, whether it's the Kennedys or the Trumps or whoever it might be. That's what they want. They're desperate for it. The nostalgia for European-style rule and European-style majesty and royalty is so palpable that as a revolution of ideas, again, as with the French Revolution, you have to question whether it was just some role reversal going on in terms of the players, but not of the play. So these things were happening, and they were the great upheavals of the time. And there was a movement towards a more rational form of government, and American democracy is a more rational form. We owe all this to the Greeks, who were there long before us, who privileged rationality and who conceived of democracy, though I have to say it was a kind of democracy that we would sneer at today, belonging only to men of a certain land-owning class. So they started it. We kept it going a bit. We could spend time this semester reading Thomas Paine, would do us no harm at all. Wonderful man, wonderful writer, who ended up completely penniless and ignored, having created, in many ways, steered the greatest revolution in human history. I think 3 people attended his funeral, one of them black, I'm proud to say, on behalf of American diversity. But the extent of his disgraceful dismissal from the fame and the culture is an indictment of not just America, it's an indictment of man and how he always goes about things. We will meet Thomas Paine. We'll meet him in Büchner's great play about the French Revolution. To have him on stage talking calmly with the like of Robespierre and Danton, that's quite a wonderful conceit. And whenever I think about it, I long for that scene to be played in front of me so that I can picture Tom Paine with, as he was, all those famous and extraordinary French revolutionaries. This is fascinating stuff in terms of the topography of history, the topography of the 18th century, And I say topography because it is really about mountains and valleys that don't change. Different people inhabit the uplands, and some of the downlanders get a little way up the mountain, but they're the same mountains and the same valleys. So I'm interested, as you can see from my syllabus, in the fantasies of the 18th century, the dreams of the 18th century, the nightmares, as we will see in Alexander Pope, least likely sufferer from nightmares, but he did, and the visionary denial of meaning in history proposed by the most rational of all authors, at least to the extent that he was the progenitor of the encyclopedia itself. Diderot, we will see how he had a vision of gorgeous nihilism, which peppers 18th century with holes. And I'm interested in those holes. I like the holes better than anything else that happens, and it happens in the 18th century. So I wanted us to be mindful of that, and also be mindful that when we talk about these things as important, we talk about mankind doing this and mankind doing that. We're talking about a tiny, tiny percentage of mankind there in Western Europe. We're looking particularly at England and France as though they were the world. But remember, please, that as much as they are not the world, and they are no more important in human evolution than what might have been happening in Nigeria or Mongolia, nevertheless the inhabitants of those far-off lands, far away from the so-called center of history and the machinery of history, we, all of us are inheritors of the struggles on the human stage of Western Europe. We've inherited them to contemplate. Nations far from us contemplate democracy and its struggles in ways that were initiated in the 18th century. The 18th century is our heritage, whoever we are, even though they are these people that we're studying, we're talking about, we're reading, are such a tiny proportion of mankind. And I resent this on behalf of all the people who ever lived who are not celebrities, because I don't think they're less interesting than celebrities. But here we are doing a synoptic class on the march of history, and so those equally interesting people that historians have, thank goodness, started to take an interest in cannot be wound into our history, which is full, alas, of celebrities. And I think it's one of the saddest things about our culture, that it is so obsessed with celebrities and only celebrities. Will we only ever elect celebrities to office? What a terrible thought. So I just thought I ought to remind you that we never have any reason to forget the parts of the world that disappear in a syllabus like mine. We need to remember that we're concentrating on a world that is our heritage, has been made into our heritage by ourselves over the centuries, seeing in it, in the 18th century, the same struggles, the same issues that we're still battling with. So they have bequeathed us much, whoever we are and wherever we are. And I also wanted to mention that noise in the background, that noise of bullets, that noise of muskets being fired, those two big revolutions that happened in the 18th century, to any effect. Something worth contemplating, I think. So, for the third, but by no means the last time, please keep safe, keep warm, keep masked, keep distanced, keep alive. Till very soon, fondly and gratefully, your Professor.